Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're excited that so many of you could join us for today's Q&A with Thomas Hübl before we begin the new course called The Spiritual Healing Journey, a 5-month intensive to explore the spiritual dimension of healing individual, ancestral, and collective trauma and wounding. My name's Anna Molitor. You may recognize me as one of the hosts of the Collective Trauma Summit, as well as the poetry curator. And I've also been an assistant in Thomas's programs for many years. And I'm happy to be co-hosting this event for you today. A few technical announcements before we get started. Closed captions are available for this event. And for those of you joining us on Zoom, you can turn on closed captions by clicking the CC button found at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you don't see it, just click more and you'll find options there. If you're finding us on YouTube, the closed captions cannot be turned off. And if you have any technical issues or questions, please email our support team at onlinecoursesupport@thomashubl.com. And those of you who are here with us on the Zoom call can submit a written question at any time by clicking the Q&A button found at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you don't see it, just select more and you'll find the Q&A button there. In just a minute, Thomas will answer questions you may have about our upcoming Spiritual Healing Journey course that starts in just 6 days on Saturday, November 18th. There's already an amazing community forming for the program. And at any time during this session, you can find out more by visiting the website spiritualhealingjourneycourse.com, and we'll put that link in the chat for you. So the Spiritual Healing Journey is a 5-month online intensive that includes over 20 hours of live online sessions with Thomas, a member-only online community, a private website, and it also includes more than 12 hours of interactive online mentor sessions. The course also includes access to 2 different foundational courses from Thomas, and when you register now, you will also receive a discount. So again, you can visit the website spiritualhealingjourneycourse.com to explore whether this might be a good fit for you. And for those of you who are new to Thomas or his work, here's a brief introduction. Thomas Hübl is a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator who works within the complexity of systems and cultural change, integrating the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science, what we sometimes call the marriage of inner and outer science. Since the early 2000s, he has led large-scale events and courses on the healing of collective trauma. He is the author of 2 books, Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World, and also the book, Healing Collective Trauma, a process for integrating our intergenerational and cultural wounds. He has served as an advisor and guest faculty for universities and organizations, as a coach for CEOs and organizational leaders, and is currently a visiting scholar at the Weiss Institute at Harvard University. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you, Anna. Happy to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, wonderful. So we can just dive right in now to the session, taking some of the questions that the community has submitted in advance. And maybe we could just start with, what is spiritual healing? What's your perspective on what that is?
Yeah, I think there are a few definitions. One is, I would say, restoring the original movement. Because often when we feel unwell, there are stagnations, there are blockages that we experience in our life, and restoring the original movement is kind of one definition, if you want. Another one is to be able to create the right environment. So healing is creating a healing environment, and there are many layers and levels of healing environments. Then we could also say, like in our time, there is a hyper-individualization, which I think is a combination of being individualized and feeling separate. And when feeling separate is one of the fundamental trauma symptoms of a collectively traumatized world, then opening that hyper-individualism and the isolation, the loneliness, the pressure cooker that hyper-individualized state creates into, and opening it up into a bigger state in itself is very healing. You could also say spiritual healing is a deeper connection to one's own inner sense of purpose, of flow, of growth, of updates, that I feel I'm constantly moving, I'm updating my life, I'm free to be creative, I can express my creativity in the world, and reconnect to that which where my updates or my growth is coming from. It's like a river. I touch my inner river. And sometimes when we in our trauma areas and trauma zones in life, we often feel dissociated from that inner river. It's like as if there was ice on top of the river. So underneath there's water, but we don't get wet because we can't touch that water, even if we know that there is water. So it's like an iced over river. And often in the places where we ask ourselves, what's the meaning of my life? What's my place in life? What's my purpose? So we are walking on the ice, and underneath there's somewhere the movement of our life, but we don't touch it, we don't feel it. And often that's very scary, because if I don't know my place in the big picture of life, then I need to compensate on that not knowing in through many, many different symptoms or ways or patterns. And so, and another version of it is learning. That's why we call this also inner science, a dialogue between inner and outer science, because the inner science, the science of thousands of years of mystical traditions, literally through people that practiced often their whole life very deeply, there's a lot of collected, let's say, expertise that over thousands of years have been brought together about inner energy flows, about the inner well-being and how to reconnect to that well-being through contemplative meditative practices, through rituals, through all kinds of knowledge that helps us to, and we call this in our work, the individual, ancestral, and collective healing process, the IAC healing process. And I think if we especially also work with ancestral and collective healing, we do need a greater context that we feel as part of, and that we are kind of grounded in order to witness from a deeper place of presence, of mindfulness, of groundedness, the turmoil of our world. And our world is going through a lot of turmoil at the moment. And I think a deep spiritual practice can give us an inner anchor to be grounded in deeper presence, so that the movements and the crises that we experience in the world, that we are connected to those and we can feel those, but we are not blown away by them, by the stress, by the fear, by the anxiety, by the existential threat. And I think a deep spiritual resourcing is, I believe, a very important power in any kind of trauma healing, as long as the spiritual path doesn't become a bypass, doesn't become my exit gate to do my inner work, but is actually becoming the resource for my inner work. So as you can see there, I could go on and on. I think that there are many ways how to describe the power of the spiritual dimension in the healing process. And there is also a beauty, there's a big landscape, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot of skills to practice and acquire. And I think it really is very supportive for our own individual process, but also for our healing work with clients in different professions. That's a short answer.
Right. Thank you so much, Thomas. I think it's very touching what you're saying also about how we can stay, in times of crisis, more open to the higher wisdom when we get more reduced to our survival level needs. And it's very important in these times. And then can you just say a bit more about how you address spiritual trauma as well?
Yes. So I see like the spiritual dimension is deeply connected to our deep meaning in life. It gives us a sense of deep connection to everything, basically, that we are part of a living cosmos, that we are part of a living world, that our planet is a living system. There are many different layers of connectedness, that we feel connected to our ancestors, that we feel connected to the cultures we are part of, that we have a lot of inner space to contemplate our life. So spirituality gives us a lot of depth, meaning, context, and also inner guidance, like that we feel, oh, there's a GPS in my life that I learn to trust. Many people connect this deeply to their hearts, for example, or to kind of an inner knowing that they have what's right for them and how to navigate. And often, I think when we see trauma happening in spiritual communities, that inner sense of compass, that trust that I choose something for my journey that's good for me, gets hurt. So many people I have seen really struggle very much. How can it be that I felt that that's actually a good place for me? How can it be that that place that I really trusted and that also might have helped me in some ways actually was an abusive place, was a place where trauma happened? So that creates a strong disorientation, or can create a strong disorientation in our inner GPS, and in how we choose places where we practice something that is deeply intimate. Because the spiritual core of our being is deeply intimate with the universe, with the world. That's why many qualities like compassion, presence, openness, love, clarity, relationality are consequences of a deep spiritual practice. And also being able to more and more to stay open in difficult moments and be able to meet difficulties with more presence and clarity. There's a beautiful line in the Tao Te Ching in Stephen Mitchell's translation that says, when the master runs into difficulties, she stops and gives herself to it. So it, first of all, doesn't say that the master doesn't have any difficulties. And secondly, we make space for what's challenging in our life in order to be more related. And I think staying related to challenges in our life is a way to describe resilience. So, how much I can stay related to challenges or difficulties in my life, and I'm not approaching them with, oh, I don't want that difficulty in my life, because once it's in my life, it's already in my life. And the capacity with which I can meet difficulties are often a deciding factor how we navigate in that difficulty. And so I think that that the capacity that grows out of healing spiritual trauma and all other forms of trauma is a higher capacity of resilience. And I think that deep intimacy in ourselves, the deep openness, a deep connectedness to life, sometimes in these opening stages, when we open up to life deeper and trauma hits us there, so can be very hurtful. And then it takes often a long time to trust again that there are safe spaces that really can hold us. And we see also in the past that in multiple spiritual communities, also big religions, the abuse of power and in all its forms have disturbed that that inner deeper trust. And I think we can see this also sometimes in the cynicism in our society and even the resistance towards the spiritual dimension that we see often. I think in some of the cases is also like a symptom of a deeper hurt that hasn't been yet restored.
Yeah, it's beautiful that you're touching that, and that there's that coming into this container of spiritual teaching is also going to bring that up for people who've experienced trauma in the past. And it's beautiful that we can have this container that includes that conversation that really touches on what people's early experiences might have been in a place where we can open that again. And also, so it's also true, and you've spoken to that in our early trauma, we can either sometimes disconnect from that inner river in that sense, and sometimes also we can, want to invite you to speak a bit about spiritual bypassing, how sometimes we can grab hold of that because of early trauma, and maybe to speak a bit about spiritual bypassing. And also, that's different ways that we can get disconnected or overly connected because of early attachment trauma.
Yeah, so the one, you said it right now already, like one set of symptoms of early childhood trauma, that it feels like that connection feels shut down, and we don't feel anymore that greater context or that greater river that we are part of. And because of the attachment trauma, we don't feel that we can really trust the river of life. So then, like a more controlled and held way of living becomes our norm from early on. That's why we don't feel even sometimes that that's what we do. We only discover this often when we do deeper inner work, how much tension, how much stress, how much trauma stress really resides in our nervous systems that might have been shut down and put away, turned unconscious. And on the other hand, for some people, the nourishment of the relational field is so scarce that holding on to the spiritual core is the only option, that the divine, God, or representations in different traditions of the divine become like the primary attachment holding. And so if that happens, so that's definitely a resource, obviously, but then being in the world is obviously dangerous and not resourcing. So it's something we move away from. And I think in the spiritual work, we need to be able to discern what is what, and also support sometimes people. Their spiritual work is actually to embody themselves first, much, much more, be willing and able and feel again the wanting and the desire to be in this world and create more safety and the ground in this world, and then to open up higher spiritual dimensions or transpersonal dimensions, because otherwise they're gonna be used as a tremendous bypass, because that's the safe place to go to. But then the world's constantly an unsafe place. And so working in the spiritual dimension is not just opening transpersonal spaces, it's sometimes very much to become much more concrete, to become much more embodied, to become much more grounded in and as a human being, and in and as our ancestral stream, and in and as our world, so that we have a good vessel, a good container in which we open up to the higher dimensions. And I think also for anybody who is doing a lot of like clinical work or work with clients or coaching work, the spiritual resourcing is actually an amazing quality, either for ourselves as people who work a lot with clients, because it gives us another stream of resource for our own work, but also skills how to be more and more precise with our clients and be more and more attuned and more plugged into the information field that we are all part of, and read that information field with more and more clarity. So that's certainly a part of the spiritual opening process for ourselves. And I think more and more clients really also want a spiritual dimension being part of the, for example, psychotherapeutic or also coaching process. And I meet many people that really want both to be combined and have a strong mindfulness space, have a strong, like a spiritual context where we can grow in, and also do the psychotherapeutic or clinical work within that context. And I think there's more and more of a demand because more and more people open up to that dimension. And it's also, it can become a great resource for our clients if they are not being overpowered, obviously, but if with spiritual stuff, but if they really can choose to engage as they want, it's another layer of resourcing, and not just that it's being kind of put on them in a way, but it's something that they can choose from, like a toolbox or an area that can be added to the therapy process. I think then that's an amazing contribution as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That was going to be my next question for you, was about how we add the spiritual dimension in our work with clients. And I wonder if there's even something like this, we'll get into this much more in the course, but if there's something just very specific example you could give of how like you're connecting with that as a practitioner with a client, how that might be a resource.
No, as the beginning, we can all feel the topics that are really difficult for us. Mostly, we don't feel enough space in our life. So having a practice that induces more space and induces a higher capacity of witnessing is already a tremendous addition to the healing process. Because when we say like a mature version of ourselves is a spacious embodied experience of a mature version of ourselves. So it's a conscious process that is embodied and went through the maturation process of an individual. But there's space that I can witness my inner process. But in my trauma areas, usually life becomes very close and tight. So there's way less space. So embodying more mindfulness practices or presence practices or inner spaciousness is already a great beginning. And then reconnecting in our clients to a felt sense, not a mental model, a felt sense of the river of my purpose through a good self-contact and openness into that I can feel more and more my purpose, that my place in life is a river. And the great wisdom traditions talk about that one thing is unchanging, that everything is changing. So that we become more and more immersed in the movement of life gives us happiness. Because how many clients come to us and say, Thomas, I'm so flowing. Nobody would say that, my life is so flowing. No, when we are in a flow, we feel we're in a flow. When things are flowing, we feel happy. Why do we feel happy? Because we feel our inner river. We feel immersed in the movement of our core. And that's also a great resource in looking at the more hurt, wounded, or traumatized parts of ourselves. But if I feel that less, so I'm much more getting sucked into the symptoms of my trauma. So establishing that reconnection to a sense of self that has more purpose, that gives me orientation in life, that feels like, oh, that's my place in life. And not just, as I said, as a mental process, but as an embodied, felt experience. And that in itself is also connecting to my inner light, to my inner flow, to my connectedness, because when I feel connected, I feel also connected to a wider context. That's why I often say we are not just, as individuals, we are not just part of an ecosystem. I think part of an ecosystem is like I put the cup in the cupboard. Now the cup is also part of the cupboard. But as human beings, we are the ecosystem. Not only we are part of the ecosystem. When we walk through nature or through the forest, where is nature? Nature is not just around us. Nature, I am also nature. So nature is through us. It's through all of our bodies. All of our bodies are the biosphere. So the biosphere is all over, not just the nature is around me. And often the individual, ancestral, and collective trauma symptoms create a sense of a separate individual versus an individual that is individualized and is ecosystemically active, is the ecosystem. And I think we created a lot of hyper individualized self explanations in the last maybe century. And some of it, I think, needs to be more decoded into that interdependent nature of self. And I think spiritual practices can open that up. And if we can support our clients to find resource in the river, in the movement, in that creative itself updating quality, then we also have more resources to deal with the difficulties and the wounds and the traumatizations, and also be able to witness more and more our unconscious patterns and turn those into conscious patterns, and from there find a growth movement. And I think that's a great addition to every level of healing.
Yeah, it's great. I love that you're mentioning this about the hyper individualization. It's because it's already touching, that's kind of a collective trauma symptom. So you're already speaking to how our spiritual practice can start to open that up in ourselves and with our clients and in the ecosystem that we are. So that's, yeah, I'm looking forward to that being opened up much more in the course. That's exciting. And so also for the course, we've kind of we're describing 10 core spiritual principles that will be explored. So there's humility, surrender, love, devotion, blessing, grace, compassion, attunement, forgiveness, and redemption. And I'm just wondering if you can, so much just came into the room with even naming that, but if you could share a little bit about that and how we're going to be exploring that and whatever comes to you around these core spiritual principles.
Mm. Yes, so in our course, obviously, every course session will address one of those principles. And the principles, when we unpack them a bit, we can see how much wisdom, why they have been part of the core of so many wisdom traditions around the world, because they hold very essential aspects that sometimes have been interpreted in many ways. But in the core of it, they hold, I think, very important aspects of our spiritual development. For example, humility is a core principle that says, when I bow down first to the fact that when I see you, Anna, I see only what I see. It doesn't mean that what I see and who you are is fully synchronized. Because when I experience you through the filters of my own past, my ancestors' past, my cultural past. And so humility is that I need to bow down. When I bow down to you, I'm saying I am in a constant learning relation with life. We all might know a lot, and we have acquired a lot of competencies over the period of our life. And at the same time, we know that we also don't know. And that means that relating is actually the process to learn from each other. So that I will be informed by you by learning from you, not by knowing enough about you. Which doesn't mean that I will also see many things and feel many things about you that are very on and that are very connected and present. But there's always something I'm going to learn from you. And I think no matter if I live a life, if I do this practice for myself privately as a private person or as a professional, learning from each other is an amazing way to be professional. And the same is true that I bow down if I know that what I know about life, this planet, the universe, the cosmos, the bigger context, the divine, is always partial, because I am part of a big creation. So I am also created So my experience will always be partial. But when I bow down to that fact, then I can receive a blessing. If I think I know how it is, then I'm not open to learn. And so humility is a beautiful practice to say, of course, we know what we know, and humility doesn't mean having a low self-esteem, not at all. We can be very strong and at the same time very humble. And I think in that practice, it's very heart opening, because I know every person I meet, every circumstance, every group I lead, every course we do, I always learn a lot, because there's always more. There's what we know, and there's always more. And I think if we live our life accordingly, then we are living in a constant update. We are constantly being updated by the people that we interact with in life. We constantly learn something new. And we can be constantly updated by the higher context that we are part of. And we can be constantly updated by what our ancestors handed over to us and the context that we were born into. And then also trauma work, individually, ancestrally, and collectively, in a way, is of course the integration of trauma and PTSD or partial PTSD. And so we are integrating what was hard to integrate when it happened. It was too overwhelming, so we couldn't. So we need some time to integrate it. But in the frozen ice of trauma, I believe there's always an ethical learning step, or when we talk about developmental trauma, also a developmental learning step that hasn't happened yet for that person because it was frozen. That developmental energy was frozen in the ice, or that ancestral quality was frozen, or that cultural energy was frozen. So when that melts, we also get the ethical update that we need in order to live as a contemporary citizen in a world that develops AI, in a world that lives in a changing climate, in a world that deals with many conflicts, in a world where we have lots of big ethical questions. And so the constant updating of our ethical line of development, so to speak, is synchronizing us as mature human citizens to be able to meet the current challenges and the current developments in technology, science, and other places with the maturity that those developments need. Otherwise, we have a gap between consciousness and technological development. And I think also in that part, the ethical learning is so important and helps us to, and humility, I think, is a way to get the blessing of constantly calibrating our inner compass.
Thank you, Thomas. I feel it's just very touching to hear you speak also about this, and from my own experience of so many years in this community, of really how deeply we do practice in this way with each other, and that it turns, as a human, as a practitioner, as someone who works with people, it means that every moment, like you said, every moment is a possibility for opening and learning and being in the miracle also of revelation. And I just want to emphasize that is a felt experience in this community, that it's a very lived experience, both with you and with those of us practicing. And that, it does away with, as a practitioner, it does away with like ever being bored or stuck, or, when you're working with someone, because if you're stuck, then you're curious and alive in the stuckness, where, it's like everything becomes a moment of revelation in that humility. And so I just wanted to join you there, that I feel how, and then things become so alive in that, like that is the flow of the connection, participating in the revelation of life every moment. So, and great. So I'm very excited also for those different principles to keep being opened, in our embodiment in this course. It's not a concept, it's a real embodied experience.
Mhm.
So we want to bring in, the team's been pulling some questions here also that are coming in now live. And we have something here from Elizabeth. Says, I think we've touched this a little bit, but Elizabeth brings in saying, in my experience, working with trauma in myself and others gets really heavy. Spirituality includes lightheartedness for me. Can the spiritual dimension bring more light and openness to the trauma healing process? Maybe if you want to say a little bit more about that. You've been mentioning that too.
Yeah, so I think there are two elements. Yes, like I think spirituality brings a resource or a freshness or an openness or a different flow into areas of stagnation. It's like when you have a pond with a lot of standing water, and then you bring fresh water into this pond. So spirituality sometimes generates the energy that helps us to bring more fresh water to areas of stagnation in our life. And then when working with trauma gets heavy, then it's always good to look at two things, like what are my resourcing elements that where I touch into flow when and spirituality definitely is one of it, but there are many more where I can create a mutual pendulum movement between movement and the parts that feel more held, or as we call this in our work, areas of reduced movement. So trauma is an area of reduced movement and creates a tension with the overall development of a human being. So there's a tension, and the tension is what we call also suffering. And so being able to be at home in both and know how to go in and out and stay in a way touching both is important. And then I find it very helpful to develop the expertise that we can work consciously with numbness, because often when we say something is heavy, we're also saying I'm touching an area that I can't feel really well, or I can't feel when I touch that area of myself, or I'm sitting with a client, that the numbness, either the physical or emotional numbness, or sometimes also mental blankness or spiritual numbness, feels like it's heavy. And some people even describe this, they describe as if there is like a black hole. But that black hole is the absence of information, the absence of conscious experience. And so when we learn in ourselves, with each other, and in communities to create the highest skill of working with numbness and absence, so that we can turn that into conscious numbness and absence, and we don't try to overpower or override it or get rid of it, then we synchronize ourselves often with the process of numbing or absencing. And we, in that moment, we re-own that. And once we re-own it, it usually can change into a deeper sense of the experience that needed that numbing. So we can slowly come back to a sense of movement and flow. And definitely the spiritual dimension is a resource, but there are other resources, relational resources, grounding resources, life resources that can help us to charge our battery, to learn how to be with one foot grounded in movement and with one foot grounded in the reduced movement, so we can turn that back and transform that into more movement, or we call that development or growth or post-traumatic learning. So yeah, so it's I think it's both. It's the fresh water, and it's also the skill to work with numbness and absence that I find very, very helpful in the trauma integration work.
Great. Yeah, very powerful. And there's a question here I want to pull right to the top in case others are having this question as well. Diana says, if I'm not a professional therapist, but feel called to take this course because it feels applicable to my spiritual journey, is it appropriate for me to join? And I want to say yes, absolutely, right away, that the course is for anyone who wants to access the spiritual dimension as a resource for their healing journey. And Thomas, if you want to say anything more about that.
Yes, absolutely. True.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, we'd want to emphasize that there's additional resource if you are working with people, but it's certainly for all of us, just being human on this planet. Patty asks, I'm curious to know if and how you plan to address trauma that occurs within spiritual practices and communities, how you might address that as an aspect of all of this.
Yeah, that's also in the description on the course homepage. It's already there. Yes, we do address that too in this course, and also on the individual level, ancestrally and collectively, we will address that and have a look how that affects us. And we will also do in some modules some live process work so that we can also see how that looks like in the live process work, and see at least some steps of the integration process. But yes, we will address them.
Great. And then we have a great question here also from Katerina, which I'd love to spend some time talking about. What is the role of community in the healing process? She says, I believe that healing is harder when not supported by the environment. Maybe you can talk about that and also specifically what the role in this course is of this kind of container, healing container, and the power that that has.
Yeah, since I'm definitely a voice in the world for collective healing and collective trauma integration, collective healing works as collectives. So I deeply believe in the architecture, the resonance, the relational competence building of communities. And our course is a huge community, is a huge global community with a lot of diversity and kind of global participation. So we are setting a container for this 5 months. So as I understand our courses is that we for 5 months are together on a journey. And so we are building a container for this 5 months where the container becomes the magnet to magnetize spiritual resources into that container that help us to first also have some skill building, some practice support, and some kind of acquisition of skills that we practice over a longer period of time. That's why we also do a course over 5 months, so that we have some time really to practice the practices and the suggestions and inspirations that we give in this course, so that we can grow. And often growth needs practice. And then there is also the healing aspect of the community, so that many people together create like a field of presence, create kind of an intensity together that serves everybody within that field. And so the community is a very important aspect of the learning process. And I deeply believe that the insights, even if we don't see each other and we don't have contact with each other in this big global community personally, but that the insights that some people have also serve everybody else, and the healing that some people experience also serve everybody else. And also in the life process work that we see that certain topics that are being presented actually resonate for many people in the group, and that individual and collective resonance is the interdependence that we are working with. So there are lots of reasons why I believe that creating healing communities is actually the tool of our time. And within that, one-on-one work can happen. Within that, small group work can happen. And we have mentor calls that happen in that. But the building of healing communities that have a vessel or a container is, I think, the tool of our time.
Yes, I am a resounding yes to what you're saying. Having experienced that also here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very powerful. Okay, so then we have another question here I understand how each person must take responsibility for our own healing, but how can we bring more trauma healing into our societies, communities, and organizations, excuse me, which seem to be causing more collective trauma for citizens worldwide?
That's true. That's true. And I believe that that's even a stronger calling to be able to create a collective healing architecture. Like since we started this work 20 some years ago, but especially also since we started to do the Collective Trauma Summit that reached so many people around the world, I and we are advocating again and again and again, and slowly we are also stepping into this levels of life where we say actually countries and governments need to create spaces, a healing architecture for the residues of the collective trauma legacy that our ancestors and the former generations left behind. And that we, like hospitals for people that really need support, I believe we need an architecture in our societies that helps us to integrate the residue that keeps replaying itself. And again and again and again, we see the trauma repetition compulsion being acted out. And I think we need to develop something new that doesn't exist yet, that maybe is self-organized in some places in the society, but it doesn't have the traction yet to be an acknowledged integral part, like hospitals. They're acknowledged integral parts of society. We want those because we know what the support is and the value and the capabilities of a hospital in our society. And I believe for collective healing, in order to reduce the trauma repetition compulsion on a collective level, also on ancestral levels, we need a different architecture. And I think the impact that that's going to have on healthcare, public healthcare costs, or healthcare costs, the impact that that has on criminality rates, on racism, on anti-Semitism, on all kinds of, or the massive polarization that we see on social media or on media and in our society, and when we saw it around COVID. There are many issues, I think, that are symptoms of an overloaded, unprocessed kind of residue that keeps replaying itself. And so, same as we learned a lot about individual healing, individual psychotherapy over the last, I don't know, 150 years or longer, we need to make a step, I believe, into collective healing or communal healing spaces where we can integrate the residue and learn post-traumatic learning and develop new ways and new structures in our society. Use the energy that is stored in the trauma, release it, and use that energy to create new, more functional, more evolutionary sound structures that are more fluid, agile, adaptable, and relational. And that will help us to transform some of our re-traumatizing societal structures. And I think it is true that we see a lot of re-traumatization at the moment. And that's, I believe, an even stronger motivation to say we really need that, and we need that globally. And we need that, and everybody who feels called to, because not everybody feels called to do that, but everybody who feels called to bring that work into policy making, into local or societal national structures. And once we have an architecture, a container, a structure for it on nationwide levels, then all the other steps, like individual psychotherapy, will also, of course, continue to happen. But we have an overarching umbrella that helps us to address the systemic dimension of trauma. And of course, the larger is the context, to have a wider and deeper and more open perspective that is more inclusive or is wiser, so to speak, is, I think, very important. And the spiritual dimension can contribute a lot. And the many traditions have beautiful aspects of the spiritual path, or beautiful containers. And I think that's a non-denominational, it's not a fixated way of looking at spirituality. It's honoring the deep authenticity of spirituality in different traditions, and it's also mindful of the shadow aspects of those traditions. And that's why I think in a global village, many identity structures at the moment are crumbling. And it seems like we are moving into a level of global collaboration that needs some of the integration of the trauma in the world in order to unstuck that kind of global collaboration to deal with the current issues that we are seeing every day in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. And I feel excited for this course to be, it's a container where we'll be learning something new together, where each one of us coming into the course will be unfolding some learning, some new potential together in this exploration. So, and that this is something new that you haven't done in this way in this community either. And so can feel this potential of, we've shared what we know already about what might be happening in this course, and yet it's going to be an emergence together in these times. So it's very powerful. And maybe just one more question before we finish, if you could, just going back to the spiritual principles, if you could say something about the principle of grace in trauma healing and in the world and in our experience.
That's a beautiful question. I think, sometimes our healing work and even our kind of individual healing work or therapy work feels like as if we need to work a lot as individuals to heal ourselves, which on the one hand, of course, is also true and important, because we need that motivation to go through some layers of our own biographical history that might not feel easy to go through. And so we need that motivation. But sometimes it feels like as if like we are trying to run a marathon and we push ourselves through and we envision how it might look like when we arrive somewhere. And I believe the spiritual traditions say, yes, you need to give what you can give, and what's in your power to contribute, you have to do your steps. You have to practice, you have to engage, you have to open up. We need to be courageous also to look at our deeper wounds, to look at our ancestral wounds, to look at our collective wounds and transgressions, because we will also talk about transgressions in the course and the restoration of transgressions. And so we do need to engage deeply. And at the same time, we are not alone. We are not alone ancestrally. We are not alone relationally. We might feel alone, but we are not alone. We are always in a relational network, even if that feels very reduced. And spiritually, we are not alone. Grace is the dimension of spirit that affects our life without us knowing how. And that's the blessing, that it's not a controlled impact, that I know, oh, I can pre-calculate how grace will help me in this life. But it's something that's outside of the reach of my personal power. But there is an effect of that higher context. Like in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao says, And the Tao gives birth to everything. It nourishes everything. It cares for everything, and it takes everything back into itself. Also Stephen Mitchell's translation. And so there is a caring, immanent aspect of the divine that's affecting our life. So it's not a lonely ranger journey. It's actually a journey that opens us up into a higher context that is part of our healing as much as we need to walk. And I'm sure many of us here right now on the line, something calls us. There is a motivation, and that motivation is deeper than just a rational explanation. So our calling to heal ourselves, to be of service in the world, to support other people in their healing process, to have a spiritual practice, to invest, for some of us, a lot of time in their spiritual practice. Something is deeply calling us. And we can't always explain what that is. And I think in that openness of the unexplainable pull or call, we know something. And it's not just we know something defined and rational, but we have a sense of that which is calling us in that place. And that often we walk our journey without clearly knowing where we are going. And in that walking into an uncontrollable future, we are walking into we're walking our path into a future of not knowing. There's an aspect that we cannot know because it's bigger than our perspective today. And there's something healthy about that. And grace is that which kisses us on the edge where our knowing and our not knowing meet. And I think that's the beauty of living a life that is being touched by a greater context of life.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, just thank you for all of this and for that transmission, which is lighting up in me as I listen and in a resonance, I imagine, for many of us, just to feel that and that calling. So thank you so much. Just pausing for a moment before transitioning to more detailed information, just to honor what's been shared here, and to you also for your deep presence and being with us in this exploration already opening here today. So thank you. And before we go, I'm going to share a few important details about the course as well. So to get all the information you need about the course, you can visit the website, spiritualhealingjourneycourse.com. It's going to be a deep and transformative journey, as you can already feel, with over 20 hours of live online sessions with Thomas, with 6 guest speakers, a members-only online community, a private course portal, plus 12 hours of live mentor sessions where you'll be able to meet with other students in small breakout groups. Some of you were asking about that community aspect. We understand it's not always possible to join the live online sessions, or you may want to revisit the content, which is great. So the sessions are all recorded and they'll be posted for downloadable lifetime access. The course also includes several bonuses, 2 different recorded courses from Thomas, 11 talks from the Collective Trauma Summit, a meditation collection, and other things. All of these bonuses are available immediately when you register, so you can start exploring, and you'll have lifetime access to return to that content in the future as well. Additionally, we are thrilled to have 6 guest speakers: Sharon Salzberg, Jack Cornfield, Bayo Komolefe, Woman Stands Shining, also known as Pat McCabe, Rabbi Dr. Tirsa Firestone, and Padre Gotuma. And you can join us again by registering on the website spiritualhealingjourneycourse.com for only a few more days because we'll begin the course Saturday, November 18th, and it will continue through April of next year. When you register in the next few days, you'll receive a discount on the course tuition, and you can pay in full or choose the payment plan as well. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. We really look forward to seeing many of you in the Spiritual Healing Journey course. Bye for now.